Hello there, it's been a while since I've dropped one of these videos. I decided tonight's a good night to start kind of putting together the base of my Endor scene. For years I've had these 12-inch speeder bikes and I really wanted to display them. And I figured, yeah, this is the right time. I actually picked up a piece of wood. I've actually mapped out where my trees are going to be at various points. I've mapped out where I want to keep areas flat and where I want to build up areas of undergrowth. But for me to do any of that, I want to put in a ground texture first. So I'm using some Drydex spackle putty. It's pink, it dries white. That way I know when it's actually dry. It's got a very good elasticity, so I can actually move this around without it breaking apart. And eventually I'm going to build up and mold around each of my tree branches, which are going to be cardboard tubes, and eventually I'm going to fill those around. I also picked up a whole pile of greenery over the last couple of years, just on and off, just little random shapes, cool stuff that would look great for a miniature flora fauna for Endor itself. So I'm going to be quite chunky with this. I want to actually build up areas quite a bit. Except for the areas where I've got my trees themselves, because I want to make sure that I can work around those. So I've marked in those areas where I want to have flat areas. So I do have these branches here that are going to be representation of my trees. So I want to make sure that when I build up, I don't build up too close to the edge. Otherwise they won't sit flat on here. I'm going to have various tools that I can go in there and kind of break the ground up texture a little bit so it's not so patched in there. I might soften areas with a paintbrush here. Eventually I'm going to come back here and paint this all dirt and brown and, you know, earth tone colors, representing the underbrush ground itself. This is dry, it's overnight, all set, everything like that. I've got a nice texture as a base area. I've got my flat areas where I want to keep like action figures standing, stuff like that. Now what my next stage is going to do is I'm going to actually base paint everything. And as I'm painting it, I'm going to actually start adding different textures into the paint. So when the paint dries, it dries and sets inside of it. So I've got different kind of mosses. Some of this stuff I picked up from like the 99-cent store. And different little rocks and beads, stuff like that. And then I ended up by picking up some flocking powder. Basically, it's coarse turf, like a dark green and a light green, stuff like that. Scenic woodland flocking. It allows me to kind of spread it very lightly over the top, and that adds a lot of green foliage and dead foliage and stuff back into the ground as my base. Here I'm going with the kind of darker browns, kind of very dark brown there, a little bit of green, a little bit of ochre colors, just stuff that can be a great base. So I've got all these different ochre browns, very earth tone. I mean, the underbrush of a forest is very much, you know, dead leaves, and then there's regrowth happening on top of it all. So you can see here that these different layers of color work really nicely on the floor. It gives it a very broken up kind of ground feel. So I don't particularly want to paint over my tree spots because I kind of now position some nice little areas there. So I'm going to paint all the way around and leave kind of like a circle so I can see where my tree points are going to be right here. T, I marked it as tree. So I'm going to stop there for a second. So I'm going to add a little bit of the flocking. So basically the flocking is just this really fine powdery kind of thing. And if you get enough out there, it makes a great underbrush. So it too, I can play around with that and drop it over the top. And I got a slightly more heavier texture one, which kind of be a bit too heavy. I'm not too sure. I've never really made a miniature forest before, so it's kind of fun to be able to do that. The other thing I've got is some heavier kind of brush. I'm not sure if I'm ready for this stuff yet, and some of this I might end up by having to spray glue in there. I don't know how it's going to work. I'm going to just staple it in there a little bit. You want to kind of still see some of your paint coming through a little bit underneath everything. Actually, this is helping to kind of push down the light greens, which is kind of cool, into the paint. That way it settles in there. So I've gone over the top of everything. I'm going to let the paint dry, let everything settle, and give it a good couple of hours to dry. But you can see here I've kept areas that are open for my tree lines where I mark them as tree, stuff like that. A few in there. I strategically placed everything in there so I know exactly where I want the speeder bikes and where I want characters standing. So I'm going to have trees that aren't blocking all that stuff. But yeah, so on to stage 3.